My name is Amelia Cole. I'm 35 years old. And last Saturday, a security guard told me I wasn't authorized to enter the front doors of my own hotel. He said it politely, clipboard in hand, earpiece in place, just following instructions. Those instructions came from my brother. If I appeared at his $92,000 engagement party, I was to be redirected to the service entrance, the one used for catering deliveries and linen carts. Do not permit main lobby access under any circumstances. His handwriting scanned into the event file, like I was a disruption, 10 feet behind the glass doors. My mother watched. She smiled. They thought I was still the daughter figuring things out. 6 months earlier, through a quiet LLC acquisition, I had purchased the hotel. Saturday was going to be educational. Christopher has always been the center of gravity in our family. 2 years older, impeccable grades, polished handshake. The kind of son my mother described as naturally authoritative. When he entered a room, people adjusted, chairs shifted subtly toward him. Conversations paused long enough to let him lead. I learned early how to take up less space. At Thanksgiving 3 years ago, my mother hosted 12 guests from church and 2 couples connected to the Caldwell family, the real estate dynasty Christopher was circling at the time. She stood between us, hand resting lightly on his arm. "This is Christopher," she said, pride softening her voice. "He's moving into investment consulting. The Caldwells have taken quite an interest." Christopher smiled modestly. "Practiced." Then she gestured toward me. "And this is Amelia. She's still exploring some options." I was 33. I owned 3 small properties by then. Cash flow positive, fully renovated. No debt beyond structured leverage. No one asked what I did. One of the church friends tilted her head. "Oh, how nice. It's good to try different things while you're young." Young. I remember holding my wine glass carefully so it wouldn't tremble. Dinner conversations orbited Christopher's networking events, his mentorship dinners, his trajectory. The word came up 3 times. My mother repeated it like a hymn. When I tried to mention a renovation project in Wilmington, the topic dissolved mid-sentence. "Anyway," my mother interrupted gently. "Christopher, tell them about the Caldwell Gala." He did. I stopped trying after that. It wasn't loud favoritism. It was ambient, constant, the kind that rearranges oxygen in a room without anyone admitting they've done it. Christopher was the future. I was potential. And potential, in my family, was just a softer word for unfinished. Over time, I adjusted accordingly. I attended holidays. I brought thoughtful gifts. I smiled when appropriate. I kept my answers short. They thought I was drifting. It never occurred to them that I was building. The favoritism wasn't subtle when money entered the room. Christopher turned 25, and my parents hosted a dinner at a private dining club downtown. White tablecloths, toasts, a framed photo of his first apartment displayed like a graduation portrait. At the end of the night, my father handed him an envelope. "For your down payment," he said. $45,000. My mother cried. "You're building something real." Christopher thanked them with the kind of steady confidence that suggested this had always been inevitable. When I turned 25, I brought spreadsheets. I had found a deteriorating 12-room roadside motel outside Biloxi. Faded signage, water stains, structurally sound bones. I didn't ask for a gift. I asked for a short-term loan so I wouldn't have to accept the bank's 18% interest rate. I laid everything out. Projected occupancy, renovation phases, conservative revenue forecasts. My mother skimmed the first page. "Hospitality is volatile," she said, sliding the papers back toward me. "And managing contractors alone isn't ideal." My father didn't look up from his coffee. "Christopher builds stability. You chase risk." That was the end of the conversation. I signed with the bank. 18%. Personal guarantee. If it failed, it would bury me. The first year nearly did. The roof leaked during a summer storm and soaked 3 rooms. The previous owner had concealed structural rot beneath cosmetic repairs. I learned plumbing from online tutorials at 2 in the morning, watched HVAC breakdown videos with the sound low so I wouldn't wake the night guests. To save money, I slept in room 4. The heater worked better there. There were nights I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wallpaper seam, calculating how many months I had before default. I didn't call home, not out of pride, out of prediction. I already knew what I would hear. "Maybe this is why we worried about you." No one visited. No one asked for updates. When Christopher bought his condo, my parents toured it twice in 1 week. When my motel finally turned a profit, I refinanced at a sane rate and paid down the principal aggressively. Within 18 months, I purchased a second distressed property near Savannah, renovated, rebranded, increased occupancy from 41% to 78% in 1 year. No announcement, no dinner. By the time I acquired my 4th property, the portfolio valuation quietly surpassed my parents' home and Christopher's condo combined. They still described me as independent, which, in my family, meant unsupported. The $45,000 difference was never about the money. It was about endorsement. Christopher received belief. I received caution, so I stopped seeking belief from people who had already decided who I was. And I built anyway. Once the first property stabilized, everything became mathematical. Refinance, extract equity, reinvest. The Savannah Motor Lodge was my turning point. It had sun-bleached siding, outdated plumbing, and a reputation I had to scrub from review sites, one response at a time. I renovated room by room, keeping half the inventory open so cash flow wouldn't collapse. I negotiated directly with suppliers. I learned which contractors inflated estimates when they saw a woman signing checks alone. I stopped correcting them. I just chose better vendors. 3 years later, I sold the Savannah property at a profit large enough to reposition myself entirely. That capital rolled into a boutique inn acquisition outside Charleston historic facade. Structural complications everyone else avoided. I didn't avoid it. I studied it. By the time I quietly purchased the Halcyon Grand, the hotel where Christopher planned to host his engagement celebration, my portfolio was structured under layered LLCs with clean separation and disciplined leverage. No speculation. No drama. 6 months before the party, the acquisition closed. I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding it, because they had never asked. At Sunday dinners, my mother still introduced me as working on a few projects. Christopher spoke about market positioning and legacy strategy, while I listened and mentally calculated cap rates. They assumed I was between directions. It fascinated me how committed they were to that narrative, even when I arrived late because of a closing, even when I took calls outside during dessert, even when I declined holidays, citing property obligations. "Oh, she's always busy with something," my mother would say lightly. Something. By 35, my holdings outperformed most regional boutique chains. Christopher still received applause for networking. I received polite nods. But somewhere along the way, the imbalance stopped bothering me. Not because it was fair, because it was predictable. I no longer needed them to see the architecture of what I was building. I just needed it to stand. And it did. By the time the Halcyon Grand entered my portfolio, I wasn't building to prove anyone wrong. I was building so I would never need permission again. They still thought I was drifting. They had no idea I owned the floor beneath their feet. 5 years ago, my marriage ended quietly. There was no public collapse, no broken plates, just a slow fracture that finally gave way. I found the messages on his phone by accident, not ambiguous, not emotional confusion. Clear, intentional, repeated. I didn't confront him in a storm of accusation. I packed a bag. I stayed at my Charleston property for a week, while the attorneys arranged what needed arranging. The staff assumed I was overseeing renovations. I let them. On the third night, sitting alone in the empty lobby, I called my mother. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a steady voice. Maybe something that sounded like concern. She listened in silence while I explained. Then she said, "Amelia, you've never been particularly good at reading people. Christopher would never let something like this happen." That was it. Not "Are you safe?" Not "Do you need help?" Just comparison. I remember staring at the security monitors after I hung up, watching grainy black and white feeds of empty hallways. Something shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was clarity. I understood. In that moment, that I had been waiting for acknowledgement from a structure that wasn't built to give it. I stopped calling after that. I still attended holidays. I still hugged. I still listened to stories about Christopher's expanding influence and the Caldwell family's growing interest in him. But I stopped offering pieces of myself. Pain went inward. Control stayed outward. And from that point on, I wasn't trying to earn my place at the table anymore. I was building my own. The email arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Subject line: Engagement event, special access instructions. It was from Daniel Mercer, the Halcyon Grand's general manager. He had been with the property long before I acquired it. Measured. Observant. Not prone to exaggeration. Amelia, there are several unusual guest access requests tied to Saturday's event. Given your relationship to the property, I thought it appropriate to flag them. There was an attachment. I opened it. A guest routing document. 3 names highlighted for alternative access coordination. The first 2 belonged to former associates of the Caldwell family. Apparently there had been a business dispute. The third name was mine. Amelia Cole, sister of groom. Redirect to service entrance if she appears. Do not permit main lobby access under any circumstances. The instruction wasn't typed. It had been handwritten and scanned into the file. Christopher's handwriting. I recognized the sharp angle of his capital A instantly. I read it twice. At the bottom, Daniel had added a note. This feels irregular. Please advise if you'd like us to override. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the skyline. The Halcyon's rooftop lights were visible between two buildings. My building. Christopher wasn't simply embarrassed by me. He had operationalized it, formalized it, made it policy. I considered the options. Cancel the event. Reveal ownership immediately. Decline to attend. Each choice would prove something. None would correct the pattern. So I typed a reply. Do not alter the arrangements. Let them proceed exactly as planned. I will handle it personally. Daniel responded within 2 minutes. Understood. Miss, I'll remain on standby. I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet. Revenge is loud. This didn't require volume. Saturday was going to be educational. Saturday arrived cold and clear. By 7, the skyline behind the Halcyon Grand had turned bronze. The glass facade, catching the light in deliberate, understated angles. Expensive without announcing it. I wore a charcoal dress. Structured. Minimal. No statement jewelry. The only thing I carried was the watch I bought after closing my second acquisition. The valet recognized my car. His posture shifted slightly, but he said nothing. I had instructed staff to treat me as a standard guest. Through the main doors, I could see the chandeliers refracting light across marble floors. Champagne trays circulating. The ballroom glowing beyond. Christopher's world. I stepped toward the entrance. The security guard intercepted me smoothly. Early 30s. Professional. Good evening. Ma'am. Your name? Amelia Cole. His finger moved down the list. It stopped. A flicker crossed his expression, confusion first, then procedure. I'm afraid you'll need to use the service entrance this evening. I see. Those are the event instructions. Through the glass doors, I saw my mother standing near the concierge desk, champagne in hand, watching. She didn't look surprised. She smiled. 5 seconds passed. Long enough to become intentional. I could have asked for the general manager. I could have ended it there. Instead, I nodded. Understood. I turned toward the side of the building. The walk to the service entrance was short. My heels clicked steadily against the pavement. Behind me, laughter spilled from the lobby, the kind that comes from people certain they're in the right room. I glanced back once. Christopher stood near the ballroom entrance, one hand resting at the small of his fiancée's back. He looked toward the lobby. Our eyes met for less than a second. He looked away. At the rear entrance, fluorescent lights hummed above stainless steel racks. The air smelled faintly of detergent and baked bread. 2 worlds, separated by one concrete wall. When I stepped inside, a line cook froze mid-motion. A server's eyes widened. They knew. Word travels quickly in kitchens. The executive chef approached, lowering his voice. Cole, we weren't informed you would be entering this way. It's fine, I said calmly. Continue service. No anger, no performance. Behind me, the heavy metal door closed with a muted echo. They thought they had contained me. What they didn't understand was this. I wasn't entering through the back because I had to. I was entering through the back because I chose to let the evening unfold exactly as they'd written it. Not anger, finality. I entered the ballroom from the side corridor and stayed near the perimeter. No announcement. No dramatic arrival. For several minutes, no one noticed me, which was familiar. The room looked exactly as I had approved it on paper. Gold linen. Tall ivory arrangements, a string quartet positioned near the west wall. 200 guests, arranged in careful symmetry. I knew the final invoice totaled down to the cent. Christopher moved easily through the crowd, confidence radiating. His fiancée, Lillian Caldwell, matched him step for step, poised, luminous, perfectly placed. My mother stood near the gift table, accepting congratulations as though the engagement were her personal achievement. When the first toast began, the room softened into attentive silence. Christopher spoke about legacy, about stability, about building something enduring. His words were polished, intentional. Lillian followed, smiling warmly. Family, she said, is about showing up. It's about vision. It's about choosing wisely. Light laughter rippled when she added, not everyone understands long-term thinking. It was subtle. It landed. Then my mother stood. When Christopher was born, she began, lifting her glass. I knew he was destined for leadership. Some children simply know their direction. Her gaze swept across the room. Raising 2 children is never simple. She continued smoothly. You encourage them both. Of course, but sometimes one just understands stability. A guest near the Caldwell table leaned toward her. I thought there was a daughter. Yes, my mother replied, unbothered. Amelia is still finding her path. There it was. Public. Clean. Rehearsed. Near the bar, I saw my attorney, Jonathan Pierce, straighten slightly. He caught my eye. Not yet. Across the room, Margaret Caldwell, Lillian's mother, was no longer smiling. She wasn't looking at Christopher. She was looking at me, carefully, measuring. The narrative had been repeated. Again. And this time, the truth was standing in the room with it. Christopher saw me before I moved. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly as he stepped down from the platform and crossed the room. "You actually came," he said, smile intact but thin at the edges. "You scheduled it at my hotel." I replied. His eyes flicked toward the entrance behind me. "How did you get in?" I specifically told. He stopped himself, told them what I asked evenly. Before he could answer, my mother appeared at his side. "Amelia," she said quietly, tension beneath the polish. "This is not the time to create discomfort." "I haven't created anything," I said. She was about to respond when Daniel Mercer approached us. Composed, professional. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, voice calibrated to carry just far enough. "We have a catering adjustment that requires authorization." My mother waved him off. "Please handle it." "I'm afraid," Daniel replied. "This requires approval from ownership." The word lingered. Ownership. Christopher frowned. "Then get management." Daniel turned slightly toward me. "Cole." The Atlantic salmon shipment arrived below our quality standard. "As the owner, would you prefer we substitute with the reserve, king salmon?" The ballroom went silent. It wasn't gradual. It was absolute. My mother's champagne glass tilted in her hand. Christopher stared at Daniel as if language had malfunctioned. "What did you just say?" he asked. Daniel didn't blink. "Amelia Cole is the sole proprietor of the Halcyon Grand. I require her decision." Silence fractured into whispers. I kept my tone steady. "Switch to the king salmon. Adjust the citrus reduction accordingly." "Yes, ma'am." Daniel inclined his head and stepped away. The quartet faltered half a measure before continuing. Christopher turned to me slowly. "You own this hotel." "For 6 months," I said. "That's not possible," my mother whispered. "We would have known." "Would you?" I asked. Christopher's composure cracked first. "Is this some kind of stunt?" I met his gaze without raising my voice. "You booked your engagement at my property. You added my name to a restricted access list. I decided to attend." Murmurs spread openly now. Phones lowered less discreetly. Margaret Caldwell rose from her seat and approached with the calm authority of someone accustomed to truth over theatrics. "Is this accurate?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Jonathan appeared beside me, silent and precise. He handed her a leather folder. "Documentation," he said. She scanned the first page. "Deed transfer, corporate filings, sole ownership." Her expression didn't show shock. It showed recalibration. "You described your daughter as directionless," she said to my mother, voice measured. "Yet she owns one of the most profitable boutique properties in the district." My mother looked smaller than I had ever seen her. "I didn't know," she said faintly. "That," Margaret Caldwell replied, "is precisely the issue." Christopher opened his mouth to recover the room. He found nothing. For 35 years, they had defined me inside spaces they controlled. Tonight, in a room I owned, the script failed, and I had not raised my voice once. The party didn't collapse. It unraveled. Margaret Caldwell drew Christopher aside toward the terrace doors. Their conversation was low, controlled, but his posture shifted within seconds from certainty to negotiation. Guests resumed talking, though their eyes moved differently now. Some approached me with polite curiosity masked as congratulations. Others chose early departures. My mother gripped my arm. "You humiliated your brother," she whispered. I gently removed her hand. I walked through a door. Christopher returned 10 minutes later. His confidence reassembled but thinner. Lillian stood beside him, composed but watchful. No one asked me to leave. No one redirected me again. The rest of the evening proceeded as scheduled. Dinner was served king salmon. The quartet played. Toasts concluded. But the hierarchy had shifted. By morning, 3 guests had contacted the Halcyon Grand for event consultations. One referenced the owner, who handled pressure with composure. Within a week, Jonathan informed me the prenuptial agreement had been revised. More protective clauses, longer vesting schedule, asset containment. The Caldwells were meticulous. Now they were attentive. I hadn't canceled the event. I hadn't delivered a speech. I had simply existed visibly, and that was enough to rebalance a room that had spent decades minimizing me. My mother called the next morning. 12 missed calls before I answered the 13th. "You planned this," she said immediately. "You wanted to embarrass us." "I showed up," I replied. "You could have told us you owned the hotel. You could have asked." Silence. For once, she didn't have a prepared response. "I didn't know you were successful," she said finally, as if the word were unfamiliar. "You didn't want to know." Another pause. "I'm not angry," I said evenly, "and I'm not trying to punish anyone." "Then what is this?" "It's simple." I kept my voice steady. "You don't get to define me anymore. Not in public, not in private. I didn't cut her off. I didn't apologize. I won't shrink to make this family comfortable. I added, if we're going to have a relationship, it will be honest. There was a crack in her voice when she answered, I need time. So do I. And that was enough. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, remember this. You don't have to scream to be seen. Sometimes, the strongest move is calm visibility. Build anyway. Stand anyway. And when the truth walks into the room, let it speak for you. This story was created by our creative team for entertainment purposes only. It is fictional and not intended as advice or encouragement to replicate similar actions in real life.